Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this coverage of my round 3 game from the Pacific Coast Open. In round 3, let's see, it was Saturday morning. It was the first game of that day, and I had a decent night's sleep. Had the white pieces playing against a player rated 1700. So the thing about this particular tournament, the way they divided up the sections, I'm one of the higher rated players in this section, so all my opponents so far have been lower rated, and that trend looks likely to continue. So it's interesting to play against lower rated players, and they are still strong enough to cause some difficulties from time to time, as we've seen. And so it leads to interesting chess. But the challenge is that you really need to win a large percentage of your games. I think I need to win 3 out of 4 games playing against players like this just to maintain my rating, or maybe 2 out of 3. So anyway, I'm optimistic, looking to score another win. That would bring me up to 2 out of 3. And I kick off this game with d4. My opponent plays d5. I play c4. And now he plays e5, the Albin counter gambit. And, well, I was just saying this in the previous video. One thing you have to learn how to do as you're trying to work your way through Class C and Class B is you need to learn how to play against all of these wacky gambits that they're fond of playing. And this gambit actually is not so bad. In many lines, black can actually get the pawn back, and but it's not the best way to play either. It gives white a bigger than normal opening advantage if white knows what he's doing. So I can't really recommend it, but I can say it's not like black is just down a pawn. Black either gets the pawn back or gets some compensation. So, but the best way to deal with this gambit is to go ahead and take the pawn, and then black pushes on with d4. And this is kind of an annoying move. This d4 prevents the knight on c3 from developing normally, and also kind of hinders the advancement of the e-pawn. Kind of puts the question to white, how is white going to develop his pieces? But, well, the first move is kind of obvious. You play knight f3 to put pressure on this pawn. You're just going to round that up if you get the chance. Black plays knight to c6. And now right here there's a parting of the ways. Well, first of all, the direct way of playing against the pawn with e3 is not the best move here, although it is playable. It does lead to a lot of tactical complications, and so it's usually avoided. There's the move bishop to b4 check, and then there's this when the check is blocked, then black can grab on e3, threatening whatever piece showed up on d2. So it's a bit tricky, although it turns out, I looked at it with the chess engine once, that it's still playable for white. But it's not the easiest way for white to play. Maybe I'll put it that way. There's lots of ways you can get into trouble. White players looked for other moves here, ways to complete the development on the king side, and this move kind of naturally suggests itself. Just fianchetto this bishop, get your king out of the center, and then you can push e3 at an opportune moment to take care of this hindering pawn. And that's the way I learned how to play it, and that's how I played in this game. It seems like the current trend is to play with the move a3 rather than g3. And I looked this up with the chess engine. This is one of the top chess engine choices as well. So this is probably a pretty interesting way to play. For one thing, the bishop can't come out and deliver that check anymore. And there's other ideas here. So, for example, if black continues with the knight e7, which is the main move, just the knight's going to come to g6 and round up that pawn. You can throw in b4. Knight goes to g6, and you put the bishop on b2. And you can see that white's pieces are pretty well coordinated against the advanced d-pawn. Black is going to get the e-pawn back, but you have pressure against this pawn. So seems like this is an okay way to play as well. Kind of an interesting line there. Maybe I'll try that next time I'm in this position. Especially if it's in a blitz game. If somebody tries this against me in blitz, I think I'll go that way just to get some experience with it. The problem is you don't see it that often. You develop a lot of experience. Anyway, the old line that is still good for white is the line that I learned. I played g3 here. And now knight to e7 is one of the top choices here. certainly a playable move, but my opponent went with bishop to e6. So black's idea here is not to get the pawn back, but just to try and play for the compensation. So he's turning this into a full-fledged gambit at this point. Let's see, and I could play with knight to d2. That's the top choice of the chess engine, and probably a better move than what I played. I mean, he's attacking the c-pawn, so I have to defend it in some way. And I went with b3. I had some other ideas for the knight, and we'll see that in the game. But this does give him a chance to throw in this bishop b4 check, and this is probably this is still good for white. But the knight bd2 move was a little better for white, according to the chess engine. But just to show this, if he were to play bishop b4 check, I would block with my bishop. He would take. I would bring my knight out. This is still good for white. I can still play bishop g2 and castle, and he can still play knight to e7 to g6 and round up this pawn. And white has some edge with the pressure against the d-pawn. Well, the way he played it, he didn't go for the check. He went with queen d7. And I just don't think this is the right plan in this position. He's setting up a battery here with the queen and the bishop to trade off my light-squared bishop. But it's not such a big threat in this position that I'm not sure it's really worth the tempos that he's spending on it. Anyway, I just went bishop g2. Now he plays f6. This is clearly, well, like I said before, he's playing this as a gambit, and here he's clearly a pawn down. And I wasn't afraid to take there. I think my development plan here is pretty clear, and there's no immediate threats. Even though if we just do a count, I guess you could say that he's got 3 pieces out, and I've only got 2 out. But it's my turn here, and I get to castle. So I've got castled, and I've got 2 pieces out, and he's got a queen and 3 pieces. So his lead in development that he picked up here is not that great. Certainly not justified. So not enough to justify the sacrifice of a pawn, really. So white's doing fine here. And now he plays another kind of slow move. He plays h6. I couldn't really figure out why he played that. Maybe he was a little worried about knight to g5. For example, well, the chess engine wants black to play rook d8. Very logical move here, getting the rook to the center, and there's always ideas of pushing this pawn forward and maybe disrupting things over here. And if I play knight g5 to harass his bishop, the bishop can go to f5. So it seems like this h6 move was not really necessary. It doesn't seem like he really needs to control that square. But anyway, h6 is what he played, and I went with knight to a3 here. Yeah, so this was my plan. One of the reasons why I avoided this knight to d2 move was I had this idea of routing the knight around like this. At first I thought, well, maybe I could put my bishop on a3 and just to provoke this exchange. But I thought, well, that's probably helping him, right? This is a piece that he hasn't developed. Why should I, give him the ability to develop it with tempo? But if I put a knight on a3 and he takes, then at least I get an active bishop, and I also have the bishop pair as an advantage. So it's probably not good for him to take right here. But in this position, actually, the chess engine says, I'd been thinking about this maneuver for a while, and I just did it. The chess engine says so that actually this is the time to strike with e3. So e3 is a move you should always, when you're playing against the Albin, e3 is a move that should always be in your mind here, that is something you want to play to kind of clarify the situation in the center and open up some squares for your pieces. If he takes, which actually the engine thinks is the best move, you get that quick development with your bishop. If black wants to trade queens, you're just getting that much closer to the endgame where you're a pawn up. So it looks like a pretty clearly winning position for white. And d3, I guess, is the move I would be a little bit more worried about. Black just pushes that pawn forward and tries to hold on to it. So the chess engine says is not a problem. It gives this line bishop b2 and bishop to c5, I guess, preparing to castle, and later blockading the pawn with knight to d2. It seems like white doesn't yet get to round that pawn up, but it also seems like white can maneuver his pieces around the pawn and white doesn't need to win another pawn. He's already one pawn up. He doesn't need to win a second pawn. So seems like in this position right here that e3 is well timed. You always look for the opportunity to play e3 at the right time in these openings. Anyway, I went with knight to a3, as I said, and this is not bad too. This also keeps an advantage for white, although technically the e3 move is stronger according to the chess engine. Anyway, black castled queenside. I brought my knight around to c2. So I've done this maneuver, and now I've got two minor pieces pointing at that pawn, and I'm going to get a third one with bishop to b2. Let's see, he went bishop to h3 now. So yeah, so he's just going through with this plan. He set up this battery so he could put the bishop here and trade off my light squared bishop. And you can kind of see if, because he intended to castle kingside, that maybe he wanted to get rid of this bishop. But overall, I don't think this helps black very much, this trade. I just ignore that, let him trade. I played bishop b2, continuing to put pressure on this advanced d pawn. He trades. I take back, and black plays queen g4 here. Yeah, there are a couple of other ways to play in this position that black could try. Queen g4 is not the best move here, according to the chess engine, although it's hard to suggest a great plan. But a couple ideas the engine has. One is to play knight to e4, just post that knight on a good square and try and stir up some trouble that way. And the other idea is to start pushing the h-pawn, which I think if I was stuck in this position, that's probably what I would go for. I think pushing those pawns forward on the king side is the better way to create counterplay. Queen g4 has logic too, though. I was threatening to take this pawn, and now he's kind of defended it in a way, because if I grab the pawn here, let's see, he'll take back with the knight, and then after I take, he has the idea of pushing the c-pawn forward, pinning whatever piece I have there. So he got the queen out of the way of the rook, so he'd have this rook against queen pin going for him, and so that has defended his d-pawn. So it has logic to it, the way he's playing. So after queen g4, I played the move h3, just harassing that queen, seeing where it wants to go. And it doesn't have a lot of good squares. He tried queen to e4, and then I played queen to d3, which turns out to be a good move. It was the top engine choice. And the problem is this queen doesn't have a lot of good squares. If it just drops all the way back, then I can bring my queen out to f5 here with check. And after he defends against the check or moves the king, then I can grab the pawn. Because I've gotten the queen off of the d file, and so all those defenses with using the pin on the d file don't work anymore. So and if the queen drops back to d6 to guard against that check, then I can take the pawn with a tempo on the queen. So the pin doesn't matter. So anyway, basically he's losing the pawn here if he doesn't trade queens. So he went ahead and took. The chess engine thinks it's slightly better to play bishop to c5, just develop a piece and let me take. And so that's the better way for black to play it. But he took. And then I took back with a pawn. So I've got a secure one pawn advantage here. He no longer has this big advanced pawn, but because it's blockaded, so he no longer has these dynamic ideas of pushing that pawn forward. And I have pressure here, so I think this is still good for white. But it seems like, well, he plays some good moves here. He seems to kind of bottle me up a little bit here. So he played bishop c5. I went rook to e1, getting my rook on the open file. He went knight to b4, provoking this exchange. But he has this interesting idea. He wants to get his bishop off of the c file, off of that square c5 with tempo. Let's see, I went rook e2 here, and then he plays the move c5. So he's probably pretty happy. He's managed to get some compensation for his pawn by kind of bottling up my bishop here. But, well, there's some good ideas here for white, and I think this is a good point to pause the video and see if you can find a plan for white, because I found a very interesting plan in this position, and so I think maybe this would be a good point for you guys to pause, think about what kind of plan you would come up with here. Okay, yeah, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. The chess engine has a plan, which is just to bring the rook down to the 7th rank. So if you thought of that plan, that's certainly a good one. That's not the plan I was talking about. The plan I came up with is also approved by the chess engine. It likes both of these. And there's probably other plans here. I just wanted to give some examples and also give you a chance to do some planning. My plan was to play a3 and kick the bishop back. And now if the bishop comes forward to c3, I was just going to trade it off and go after the weak pawn there. And actually the chess engine says bishop to c3 is the best move here. And then just leaving the pawn there for a moment, playing b4 here. Let's see, he could try and defend like this with b6, exchanging, and then knight coming around to e1 to blockade this pawn and bring a rook over to round it up. So that's that would be pretty good for white. I don't know if I had thought that far. Actually, I think after bishop c3, I planned to play rook to c1, which is another way to play it, but not quite as good. But just simplifying things and then later pushing these pawns. But he didn't. Anyway, I was okay with him playing bishop c3. That was one of the ideas of my plan, was to allow him to play bishop c3 and just trade it off. And then the other idea is that what do I do if he goes back here? But this move is a mistake. And, well, if you want to see if you can figure out what my next move is here, you could pause the video again. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away. My idea here was to push on with b4. And what this does is it really activates things. If he takes, which is how the game went, he took. And, you know, he's momentarily getting a pawn back, but the a pawn is hanging. So I get this pawn in exchange for the b pawn. I've activated my rook. And now also this bishop has come alive too, in a way. It's now not... This pawn is no longer so solidly protected, so this bishop is fulfilling a role here and putting pressure on the d pawn. So I was able to activate that bishop without actually moving it at all. So I thought that was a nice plan. Anyway, he went bishop c5 here, defending his pawn, kicking my rook. I could deliver the check here. The chess engine likes that move, but this is okay as well. And I just keep that check in reserve. I'm looking for the best time to play that. And then he played rook h to f8. And now, right here, there's a tactic that I actually missed. So if you want to look for a tactical idea, it's white's turn to move. See if you can spot the tactic. Okay, I gave a bit of a clue when I mentioned the check on the back rank. There are some problems on the back rank for black, and white can exploit it by just taking. Knight takes d4 can be played right here. You can just take that pawn. If he takes, you just keep taking. And if he takes back, now you have the rook coming down here with the check and picking up that rook. So this leaves you up the exchange. So pretty nice little trick. You're basically giving up the knight for the rook, trading the knight for the rook, plus you get a pawn as well. So that would be pretty clearly winning. Well, actually, after knight takes d4, he shouldn't even take that pawn. He should look for something else to do. Anyway, I didn't spot that idea during the game. Well, I think actually I thought about it, and for some reason I thought this rook was defended and it wasn't working. So a little bit of miscalculation on my part. Anyway, I played rook to e5, which is also a good move, hitting his bishop. And I think we've reached the kind of position where there's lots of ways to win, but that would have been a better way. So he played b6, and now I went bishop to a3. This may seem a little bit strange that I am trading off my bishop that I went to all this trouble to activate against his bishop, which seems to be just sitting over here doing nothing, just looking like a big pawn. But, well, it weakens when I get rid of that bishop. There will be a weak pawn left on the c5 square that I can go after. So this turns out to be okay. Let's see, he played knight d7. That was one of the defenses that I had thought about he might try here. So he doesn't want to allow me to trade and grab that pawn with check. So he defends the bishop with the knight. And I play the nice move rook d5. It's got a couple of ideas here. One of them is I'm just going to take the pawn. And there's another idea. There's a tactical idea here, which is if he moves his knight back to f6, which I thought he might do, that's a little bit of a trap, and I have a very good move there. So, in fact, he did play knight f6. He fell into this trap. But otherwise, he's just losing another pawn. Anyway, so he went for the tactical solution. So can you find the move that I played during the game? Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. This was my idea here. I'm giving the answer away now. My idea was to go ahead and take the bishop, just ignore this threat to my rook, because when I take, I'm also threatening his rook. And he just continued exchanging. It's technically better to take the bishop with the pawn and allow this check and just, give me that pawn, because otherwise he loses even more material. But, well, you can see why that would be a pretty, this position is pretty clearly winning for, white with the 2 extra pawns and active pieces. So you can see why black wasn't too happy with that. He tried going for the exchanges, but this is even worse. He takes my rook, I take his rook. He has to save the knight. And now I can just start mopping up his pawns. He had no way to save these pawns. He could have taken the bishop instead. Maybe that would have been a little better. Oh no, he can't take the bishop. That's right. That was the other point. If he takes the bishop, then I have the check picking up the rook. So really, he's just completely busted in this position. So he did have to move the knight, and that gives up a couple of pawns. This not only loses that pawn, but now the bishop is actually forking these pawns. He saves the h pawn, and I grab the d pawn. So after this, it's just kind of a mopping up operation. Let's go forward some moves here. Just keep my pieces active. I've got an extra piece and I've got extra pawns, so this shouldn't be anything too challenging. Let's see, I did give back 1 pawn there, but I got my pieces on safe squares and I still have extra pawns, so this all seems fine. I advance my b pawn all the way to b6, and then I leave it there. I didn't want to just push it here prematurely and have him round it up, so I leave it there and I look around for a plan. The chess engine says that rook to a7 is a winning plan here, although it's a little bit hard to see how that directly leads to a win. Although it does have the advantage that it starts to limit the squares that the king can go to, and now I can maneuver with the bishop and the knight and try and use threats against the king as well as the advanced pawn to try and either mate it or push that through. But it's not, there's no short, simple plan there. So I went with something that was a little slower, but seemed to be just as effective. I've got this pawn already pushed forward, but I have passed pawns over here on the king side as well, and I just started pushing these. I went g4. Let's see, what did he play here? He tried rook to b3, getting behind my pawn. I went g5. He went rook to b4. Went g6, just pushed that pawn forward. He went knight to e6. And now I went rook to a7. And here he resigned, because now the rook is supporting this pawn. And oh, actually, he didn't resign. He actually ran out of time. This tournament, you had to make 40 moves in an hour and 40 minutes, and then you had 30 minutes for the rest of the game with a 10-second increment. So this is move 40 here, and he was trying to figure out how to stop everything that's going on in this position, and he just ran out of time. But anyway, he was clearly losing in this position anyway. So that was a fun game, and it brought my score up to 2 out of 3, so probably breaking even on the tournament from a rating point of view. Stay tuned. I'll be bringing you coverage of my round 4 game next. See you then.